I'd like to welcome everybody to the June Public Works Committee meeting at our new time of Thursdays at 6 o'clock. Roll call, please.
Chairman Lockmiller,
Here.
Alderman Leahy. Here. Alderwoman Tice.
Here.
And Alderman Wiggy.
Here.
Move on to approval or amendment of the agenda. Is there any changes to the agenda? And we could consider it approved by acclamation. Okay, so be it. To move on, we have no announcements. Move on to citizen comment. Anyone from the audience wish to come up and have any comments? Seeing none, we'll move on. Reports from committee chairs and aldermen. I would just like to congratulate the Blues on a great win. I wish we could adjourn to Obie Clark's, but I guess we got business to do.
They were busy last night.
It was a great game. Alderman Leahy,
No comment.
Alderman Wiggy,
No report.
Alderwoman Parker Tice,
No report.
City Administrator, any report? No report. Move on to department reports. I think, Eric, you have something regarding the Emerald Ash Borer policy?
Good evening. Last month we talked about an amendment to the Emerald Ash Borer plan, basically allowing residents to be able to treat the ash trees. And it all stemmed from resident Jim Relling, who wanted to treat 2 ash trees on his property. In the past month, I spoke with Mr. Relling. He's very excited. He's really interested in the program, as we talked about last month. The first part of the program, as we discussed, is doing an upper canopy assessment of the tree with Davy Tree. Davy Tree indicated the cost would be $160 per tree. As we discussed at the last Public Works Committee, we thought that cost should be borne by the resident. As I discussed that with Mr. Relling, he was very interested to see if the city would be willing to split that cost. So see if we take half of it. And so obviously, I talked to him, said, hey, at the last Public Works Committee, we really thought that would be a cost borne by the resident. He really pushed for it. We talked about in staff meeting, we thought we'd bring it back to committee to see if the committee would be interested in the city moving forward with bearing half the cost. And that way I'd be able to go back to Mr. Relling saying yes or no, and then put this issue to bed, basically. So that's why I'm here with this little update. I will also let you know that we did have another resident who's interested in the program. So it is possible that we might be doing this with another resident as well. So,
Questions for Eric?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that the city would agree to split the cost of the $160 per tree inspection for canopy with the resident.
I'll second the motion, but could we have some discussion
Yes.
before we do?
Go ahead, Nancy.
So I do have a question. Do you anticipate very many more residents wanting to do this?
I don't. This is through year 2 of our 5-year program, and we've only had 2.
Okay.
That have actually indicated interest in this program. It doesn't mean we won't have more, but I think we're, a little bit over halfway through the program already.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Eric.
Brandon?
Yes.
Yeah. So, what's your best guess at what the cost of the chemical treatment is?
It depends on each contractor. Depending on which contractor everyone would use would be a little bit different. Obviously, each cost is different. I believe Mr. Relling had got a cost about $500 for a 2-year treatment. It was an estimate he got from one contractor. Now, he's not asking the city to do that. He's just asking for the canopy assessment.
And the canopy assessment is necessary to determine if chemical treatment should be done?
Yeah, just to make sure that the tree is free of any borer, because if there's borers in the tree, then we discussed last month that we wouldn't move forward, that then at that point the tree would need to come down.
And then when the 2-year treatment's up, then there would have to be another canopy inspection every time that they wanted to go forward with another chemical treatment?
Typically, no. Typically what happens once the chemical treatment starts, you can continue that treatment throughout the life of the tree without having to do the inspection again. We could put that into our plan if we wanted to, but typically most arborists say that you don't need to once you do that initial inspection.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? Discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Nay.
3-1. All right, moving on to another department report. I believe it's Dan with the water drainage runoff issues we're having. Sure.
So we've been having further discussion about this item, and we would like to kind of have the presenters come to the podium a little differently. So if it's all right with the chair, I'd like Lisa to start, and then Steve, and then that hopefully City Attorney O'Keefe is here, and then if there's a need, then Dan can fill in on some of the issues.
Okay. Well,
Okay, so
Good,
Lisa,
good, all right.
Good time.
good. Thank you. Perfect.
Your
timing.
ears must have been burning.
all right, Lisa, I guess you're up.
And obviously, we have Jim and Christy from Horner Schifrin as well.
Great.
So I'm sorry that Dan didn't know he was going to get preempted here, but so anyway, but yeah, the reason why I kind of talked to Bola later this afternoon, just about kind of an outline for tonight and what order we should take things in. I don't want to take up too much time, but I did want to make just some opening remarks. And generally, just so that we're probably all at different levels of knowledge about our codes and requirements and so forth. So I thought if I could just take a couple of minutes to kind of just provide an overview of what kind of codes we have in our processes, that might be helpful. So if you wouldn't mind then. But yes, I generally want to talk about then residential private drainage issues. And I think the first thing to state is that as we see it, they kind of generally fall into two broad categories. And the first category is when we get a complaint for something and they think that it's probably more or less driven for something that has occurred recently. There might be some type of disturbance, such as new construction or maybe a street project or something, that all of a sudden they feel like they're getting more water onto their property. So that's kind of the one category. And then the second category we run into a lot, and then this year have been just, I don't even notice how to say the volume of the calls and complaints we receive, is just what's been an existing condition, more or less. But, you know, it's either got more severe or more significant, or we've had a weather like this that all of a sudden it's like, I want this addressed now kind of thing. And we understand that. And so first I want to say that either way that comes in, we do start to dive in and look at what type of complaint we received. So if the complaint is made based on a recent disturbance or something that's kind of happening in the general area, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to check if the construction site itself is maybe what's causing the issues. And if it is, and it can be detected, then obviously we take measures immediately to try to stop that. So I also want to make the point that it is allowable for landowners to continue to use the course of natural drainage ways in order to drain their property. So I know we run into this a lot. Some people feel like, nope, everybody should be retaining their own water on site, and no water should be crossing into my property. Not now, not in the future, not ever kind of thing. So, and I'm sure probably our legal and even our consultants can really give you more background information about that. But just kind of wanted to make that point. I'm also not aware of any federal, state, or even local laws that make a property owner just retain all their runoff on their own property. The exception to that, as I understand it, is if you do have more than 1 acre, 43,560 square feet, or more of land, then you do need to provide retention. You need to submit a stormwater pollution prevention plan. And then you're also going to have to receive a state permit from Missouri Department of Natural Resources, and then also we will permit that as well. It's called a site disturbance permit. This is usually going to be at commercial job sites, which I don't believe is our topic this evening. So construction disturbance, adding to the volume of water a neighboring property receives is not good and may not be legal. So that's really what we want to check for. So in a few minutes, though, I am going to ask Steve to provide just an abbreviated version of what we currently require or check for regarding drainage when we look at new construction projects. This even came up last night at the P&Z with the site plan question, so I think it's good to just briefly hit that. But I think what would be also good is just to hit generally what city codes we have right now, and these would be parts that are in or sections in our code that deal with new construction. So, for instance, in Chapter 400 zoning, we do have a section that's entitled Stormwater Management, Grading, and Erosion Control. So this section, as I read or interpret it, applies to land disturbance activity that, as I said before, disturbs more than 1 acre of land. And again, has the requirements to follow to receive both a site disturbance permit from both the city and from the state. Chapter 500, or I'm sorry, also in Chapter 400, we do have a section entitled Flood Hazard Control, but this section addresses grading and development in delineated floodplains and floodways. Then in Chapter 500, we have the Buildings and Building Regulations chapter. This is going to include a section for grading and excavating. So grading for a foundation, basement, or for any type of building for which a building permit is required doesn't have to get a separate grading permit under this section. So, but the information that we review on a grading plan under that section is very similar to the information we do ask for and we review for a site plan for a new home. So what that information usually includes is existing contours of the site and the adjoining strips of non-site property, and then the proposed contours at 2-foot intervals after the completion of final grading. So that's one thing we look at. We look at the details of the site erosion and siltation control, and then also any details of any interim drainage system proposed to be installed during the grading operations. So Chapter 500 also includes the building codes that are developed by ICC, which is the International Code Council, and these have been adopted by the city. Right now we're on the 2009 version. Another item on the agenda tonight is for our recommendation to move forward with the adoption of the 2018 ICC codes, but in particular related to the residential properties. One of those codes is the IRC, which is the International Residential Code. And the IRC does have a few references to drainage, which I'll also ask Steve to cover here briefly in a few minutes. But I think once you hear the references in the code, I don't know if you'll agree, but I think they're very general, and I think they're also very subjective. So, and then the last city code section to mention is Chapter 220, which is our nuisance section. So this section helps to describe certain situations which may be declared nuisances affecting public health. And the two worth noting for our topic tonight are the one that's cited in 18, which talks about water or other liquid diverted from a sump pump or other facility, structure, or device, which flows, though, onto streets and sidewalks. It doesn't have a reference to neighboring property. And then another one that might be worthy to note is number 1 that says stagnant water and water collected allowed to stand for more than 36 hours would be considered a nuisance. And it's interesting when I feel like people are trying to report things for us to cite for their drainage problems. There isn't a whole lot to cite as I see it, but sometimes they'll use this nuisance section and even this idea about, well, the water's coming over and the volume of it is making a pool on my property, which again, if it would pool on the property, could lead to things that would be a public nuisance with having breeding grounds for mosquitoes and so forth. So, you know, everything that I mentioned in our code, if we've overlooked anything, we are so open to applying something maybe that we don't know is in our code or improving on our codes, but as we see it, that's pretty much what we know that we have at our disposal at this current time to deal with it. And everything that I mentioned again is really related to new construction and that first category that I mentioned of complaints that come from some type of disturbance. So there's even less, I feel, to work with when we have existing drainage problems, but that's what this whole topic is on the table for, so to speak. So, you know, other than the nuisance, we can sometimes kind of work with that with existing conditions, but that's about it. But hopefully with that, that's just a little bit of a quick overview. And that's what we're here for, though, is to find out maybe there's something that could be added to codes or something else we need to be doing. But those two little areas that I talked about for Steve, maybe to just kind of go over what we do look at for permits, I think would be helpful. And then if you're interested, we can just go over those few citations in the IRC codes. But I'll pass it over to Steve.
Thanks, Lisa.
I'll start with an ARB submittal. Typically, what is submitted is it's really more exterior aesthetics, architecture, things like that. Usually, there is a rudimentary floor plan included, and contours are also required at ARB approval. Now, they're really only on there for existing conditions because this is a submittal for a planned project. It's not, nothing's been approved up until that point. After ARB is approved, then it's their next step is to submit building plans for permit. That gets a little more detailed. There is an engineered site plan required by a registered surveyor. There's an existing condition site plan and a proposed. What we check for there is that if the water is flowing across or leaving the site, that the contour, the elevations match up from the existing to the proposed. From the existing to the proposed. And I mean, the rest of it really is code issues as far as construction. That's the only thing we do on the site as far as drainage.
Steve, when it comes to sump pumps and their discharge, we don't have anything that says, all right, where you're supposed to discharge or where that's located on the home or the addition or whatever.
No, that's I mean, they typically choose the location of the pump in the basement, and then they'll exit at the closest point. There is an ordinance not allowing discharge onto a street or sidewalk from the sump pump. Since I've been here, we have required that sump pumps terminate at least 10 feet from any property line. Now that's on new construction. We're not trying to go back to existing homes and having people move them. We've had a lot of issues this year because people's sump pumps are running a lot. And I think that 10-foot number was drawn from a drainage statute from state law. That was an administrative policy that was initiated. It's not in an ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask a question. So one of the issues that I've heard lots of issues from constituents on this. One of them is a Helitech system, and it is dumping. I kind of looked at the yard. I don't know that it's necessarily 10 feet. It might be 10 feet back from the curb. It's certainly not from setback from the property line. But then it goes on the sidewalk, and then now and I think this property owner would like to fix the problem. But do we look at would you look at a Helitech system if someone's putting that in? And how do people know that it should be set further back so that it doesn't cause a problem later?
I don't know that they would know if Helitech typically has their own engineer on staff. At least the ones that I've dealt with do. And I don't necessarily know that I mean, if they would try to research Brentwood's ordinances, they wouldn't find that.
Right.
I mean, if people ask, we tell them, or especially on new construction, I mean, it is related to them very early in the construction process.
But I guess, Mike, how would people know? So now he wants to fix this problem that he might have had done differently to his property if he had knowledge that the pop-up drain was supposed to be at a different spot in his yard.
I guess if it's just a pop-up drain, that pipe could be shortened relatively easy. They're typically pretty shallow where they come out. They usually don't dig them very deep. And I'm not quite sure which Helitech has more than one system that they use. If this is a exterior one to dissipate water, or if it's just a collection system in the basement. If it is just a collection system, it's not going to be any different than a footing system on a new home.
And I don't know the deck.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little confused, so forgive me if I crisscross. In the Lisa's part of the presentation, the drainage issues are on properties greater than 1 acre. But the way you're speaking, Steve, if we're talking new home construction, normally that's a third or a quarter of an acre arrangement. And you're telling me that you're looking at contour intervals at every 2-foot arrangement. And I'm under the impression that our code doesn't require the homeowner to give us the contours of the property. So where am I crisscrossed and messed up?
Well, I mean, what Lisa spoke to was the
Drainage.
on projects more than an acre.
Yes.
I guess
Which means less than an acre, I don't have those ordinances that would prevent that drainage problem?
I don't believe so, because like the SWIP plan, the stormwater pollution prevention, none of those things, the state permit, none of those would be required on a
Because
single
of the size of
building
the lot.
Right.
I went so small, they go, no, that's all right. Now, the neighbor says, but you did X, Y, Z, and you're dumping more water on me. So now I'm back to just dealing with nuisance codes, because my homes aren't that humongous. So how do I make him happy?
Well, typically we'll require a swale down the sides of the house to keep anything that's traveling from the front to the backyard in the 5 feet that they have on their property. The way things are, new homes now in Brentwood are typically built to the minimum side setback. I mean, that's just we don't very often get one that's more than that.
All right.
So they have 5 feet to work in to if the water has to go to the rear, it is shown on the engineered site plan on the proposed condition page. They draw it to look like an arrow, meaning water flow in that direction. And that's the way it needs to be graded before a final inspection is done.
Okay.
Okay.
Man's finished with all of his nice construction, and we wait for a decent storm. The storm comes, and now the neighbor goes, but this is here now is my problem. His water is, as much as his swale's there, it's still dumping on my yard. How do I satisfy him? Comes to you all and says, let's go look at the plans all over again, and you all look at the property as to how it ended up to the plans, and because it's less than an acre, the answer is he complied to the building plans. That's the best answer I can give him. I can cite a section and verse that says, no, the guy has to go back and fix it because he's not allowed to put water on my yard.
Well,
If I may, he is allowed to put water on a neighbor's yard.
Okay.
Rain falls everywhere,
Yes.
okay? Topography differs from foot to foot. And it has never been the law that one property owner could not discharge or cast off surface water to a neighbor.
Because of the size of the property.
No, because rain falls everywhere, and one is not liable to one's neighbor because the rain that fell on me went downhill to them.
Okay.
we are dealing with a condition now that water is actually traveling across a property.
Yes.
Because there's
Phyllis Drive.
Yard slope, and if the water was traveling across the property before construction, I believe that it's legal to travel across the property after construction. We look for, in the contours, we look for places where water would leave the property and try to have it graded so the water goes to that point. And typically that's the way surveyors approach it. To not change the direction. Volume is a little different story. Sometimes if you if you do a comparison of the footprint of the house coming down, these big 2-stories sound like they're a whole lot bigger because there's a lot more square footage, but the actual footprint isn't much bigger than what the house that was there. So the impervious surface factor of that isn't all that much greater. So the volume tends to not be as much as people might think. You know, a lot of people, there are, it seems like people get a little hypersensitive when there's a new home being built next to them. Yeah. And we deal with that a lot, but I mean, I think we're doing our best to hold to what the existing conditions were.
In our current code, Steve, for a residential home, less than 1 acre, when you ask for my site plan, you are asking for topographical arrangements on my site plan showing the flow.
Yes, sir.
To work with. I have a resident that is constantly telling us that no such is existing and that they turned around and have nothing on, I'm going to use the West Community Credit Union as our example. And I'm not aware that we require topographical and elevation changes on residential. I'm staying with small lot versus large lot. Help me, please.
So we do have a site plan, and so this information is provided to us. But I guess another point I left out that I think is important to make is that when the plans are submitted, they have a professional engineer that has designed that plan and has put their seal on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us to try to become the engineers or review the coefficients of the drainage calculations and all that, well, you're just not looking at two professionals here, professional engineers. So it kind of also, I think that's a point to be made, is that, you know, that's why we question ourselves going out at times and consulting on some of these issues and so forth, because again, we don't have the credentials. And as soon as staff would go out there and maybe start saying, yep, that's all you really need to do is start putting that westerly. As a staff person, now we just kind of have stepped into that liability standpoint, because now we're starting to offer consulting that we're not really, you know, professionally able to give. So we kind of feel like that if they've already have a site plan that they've paid for, that someone sealed, then if there becomes a problem, it really is the person who designed it and who sealed on that work. So just kind of bringing
Lisa,
that
I'm going to take you back if I may.
Okay.
When we ran into a major problem with dealing with Kingbridge on a couple of their homes, the site plans do not have any contours on them whatsoever. And both problem homes had a problem with the new home going in, being up elevated, and changing the entire gradient of the yard as much as 4 feet type thing. So I'm back to my original question. On large projects, you may have a contour requirement, but on the small residential homes, in Brentwood, mostly 1/3 to 1/4 of an acre, do I really have a code that says I must have contour lines on my site plans?
So they do have contours, but I don't think they go out to the extremes on adjoining properties as you would on a larger site. And that is kind of in essence some of the problems, I think, as well. I don't exactly know how to counter that, because how do you have, if you're building a house on a 5,000 square foot lot, how far do you have that engineer go? Because the drainage, again, could be coming 4 lots down. So do they start their work, you know?
I understand, yes.
Right.
I understand what you're
that's
saying.
We're open for discussion, so we're not at all
Alderman
trying to-
Luckmiller, we do have engineers in the room, so if you would recognize Christy Wilson with Horner Schifrin, who can speak to some of these questions as well.
As long as, okay.
Good evening. Hi, just to maybe clarify a little bit for your
Please.
question. Typically, when you get a site plan, like they're referencing, and the contours are on there, but it's generally an overview to look at where the flow is going. It's not a detailed evaluation. It's a general, the water is going to flow as it did before, because that's why you're asking for the contours, because you can't change where the water is draining from its natural or original location. So if if the flow is going across a neighboring property or down a backyard and into a creek, it still needs to go that way. So your site plan would have contours to allow you to show that that's what it's doing. It's still doing what it did before. It does not address any restrictions or flow amount changes. It's all just to explain where the flow is going. That's what you're getting on those contours on the site.
Now, you're talking about what the engineer is giving me.
Even on the site plan that you would require, yeah, with the contours.
All right. My specific question is, does the Brentwood code specifically require on a small lot development for residential that contours be part of that engineering submittal? Or is that something that is a courtesy that, depending on which engineer I hired, he did or didn't include it?
I believe with any of your building permits, you're required to supply that
Okay.
information.
Lisa, if I may ask, if you take time to look and send me an email, I'm not aware that in our codes for the residential properties less than an acre, we have this requirement.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm stuck on it.
Sure. So I think we're probably all trying to say the same thing to there are contours, but what do they represent? But maybe a better way would be to actually share with you, share a couple of site plans for new construction homes, and we should have probably had a visual. So.
Okay.
But yeah, we can still be
Thank
more
you.
precise.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question on this. So there is a site plan with these contour lines, and say there's a new house being built, and the water, it's the site plan of the house that's under construction, or, and so the water contour lines go, and you build this new house, it's less impervious, if I'm saying the right words, land, and all the water flows into a neighboring yard, and all of a sudden their yard is flooding, their basement is flooding, they have standing water. Is the only recourse then a nuisance problem? I mean, so I'll put my citizen hat on, and I said this in a meeting the other morning. I just added onto my house. If you had told me, and hopefully we did everything right, but if you had told me, I needed some sort of drainage storage container under my yard because I have a sump and it needs to be 10 feet back, and my yard was all dug up, and I was already doing this, fine, I would have, if that's what I needed to do to keep the water from running into the street, I would have happily done it. But if all of a sudden now, I'm on a corner with the street, if all of a sudden now my water's running in the street, I'm causing a problem with the street, hopefully I'm not, but, and then I have to go fix it, that's a problem. Same thing with the new house. If there was something in place to try to address some of the water runoff issues that would come, and maybe this isn't even something that can be done, or no other municipality does it, and this isn't something possible, but if it was in place when you're under construction, when everything's all dug up, is that something that would help some of these situations, and is it legal?
Who wants to take that?
Okay. To respond to your question, right now your codes do not have that. So you're saying if you'd known about that issue, right now all you have is that nuisance code. So you're saying if you knew about it, you would have put something in to fix it.
Yeah,
But you
knock
don't-
on wood, I not.
Right, I understand. But you don't have anything in your current codes that requires somebody to put something in to reduce any additional runoff from, say, a new addition to their home, or anything of that nature that is increasing that impervious surface. Your code right now does not have that requirement.
Are there, may I ask if there are do you see this in other municipalities? Have you, and is that something that's done?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there are other communities that have those requirements.
Okay.
I think the thing we're dealing with, I think we've gotten off what the problem is that I think cities dealing with, and a lot of it's the mechanical sump pumps that are pumping this water into the front of the yards. Right. I think we've dealt with runoff, and I think our current code does not allow someone to change the grade of their their site. And as Mr. O'Keefe said, it rains everywhere. This water's going to run where it wants to. I think what we need to deal with is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bola, is the problem is the mechanical part of it, the sump pumps and that nature that all of a sudden comes to a new build that wasn't there before because it was not required by old housing, is now pumping all this basement water out onto the front yards. Am I wrong?
Pumping it to the front yards, pumping it
I mean,
onto
that's
the
what-
city
that's what we're
sidewalk,
seeing.
and ultimately onto the street.
That's what's freezing.
Yes.
Causing the freezing, causing the ice.
Well,
the
some of
nuisance.
the ones that we're seeing are new builds in Ward 1. I mean, I think it's both.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's yes and.
But I think it's not natural topography runoff, it's these pumps pumping this.
Or that the yard has 2 houses instead of 1, so they're a lot more covered, there's a lot more,
It has nothing to absorb the
right,
water.
right.
Right. And to add to your question earlier, these codes are becoming newer because as you're seeing, you're getting a lot more, we call it infill development, where people are tearing down homes and building newer ones, and they're adding those, whether it be a sump pump. But even with a sump pump, you have to have that pervious area, that grass area for the water from the sump pump to absorb into the ground. And so that's where some of these newer codes are requiring that there be enough of that ground area to absorb some of these things.
And I think currently we just don't enforce, or we don't really have the code that says, where is that discharge gonna go and how is it gonna be handled? Am I correct, or? Steve,
What we enforce now is that 10 feet minimum, 10 feet or more from a property line for the discharge.
from the front or side?
Any property line.
Okay,
So I mean, it would have to travel 10 feet. I don't know if the answer is to make that dimension farther. I don't quite know how the law works that way, as far as if we could, from my understanding of it, the 10 feet comes from the state drainage law. That's what the state requires. But, so I mean, that's the number we chose because it was an administrative policy, not an ordinance that was passed.
okay. Thanks. Question?
Could I give a very long-winded answer?
Yeah,
I mean, really long-winded.
Uh-oh.
well, you're here.
I think it would be helpful to consider, my comment before, rain falls everywhere, and there's something downhill from everywhere, okay? And in that context, I think it might be helpful to consider, this has been the subject of disputes between neighbors since there's been neighbors and rain, okay? I mean, the courts have dealt with this problem for centuries. And there has been an evolution in how the courts view these claims between property owners that you're casting off too much water on my land. And the principle, which had been operative in Missouri for decades, had been what's called a common enemy doctrine. And that is that surface water is the common enemy of all property owners. And any property owner is entitled to defend against it by damming it off, by redirecting it, by discharging it in a different place or in a different direction. And as long as they did not collect it and discharge it in harmful quantities, that come gushing out of a pipe and dig out a gully, they were free to do it with no liability to the downstream people that caught the water or the upstream people who got dammed off and got stuck. They were free to do that because you've got a right to defend your property and make use of it and to protect it just as much as the neighbor does, okay? That principle has evolved now, and the Missouri Supreme Court adopted a new principle, which is reasonable use. As long as one property owner is making reasonable use of their property, that is not unreasonably collecting and discharging water, that they're doing something which makes sense with a reasonable use of their property, again, they can discharge surface water or cast it off on a neighbor without liability. One of the concerns that I think you have to keep back in your mind, without getting into a great deal of attorney-client communication in a public environment, is from converting this private problem between property owners, which will survive any regulation that you make, there will still be these, and converting that from this private dispute to a taxpayer liability problem. Right? No matter what regulations you enact, there will be from time to time inadequate area to detain, collect, or percolate surface water so that it does not hurt others. That will happen. And those, if you have those regulations and saying thou shalt not discharge water, those who get hurt will say it's your fault, city. Okay? When in fact, the question is, it's just too damn much rain. Even if we have regulations such as some other communities has been suggested, say we have to get information showing that you will not unreasonably increase the discharge of surface water from your property, we are not going to make an independent determination of that. We will expect the applicant to submit evidence from a licensed professional, architect, engineer, land surveyor, that says, we believe with this project, it will not unreasonably discharge additional surface water on neighbors, given an average rain or a 30-year rain or a 50-year storm or whatever. We're not going to attempt to second guess that. We're not going to redesign someone's project and accept the liability for the design responsibility on behalf of the taxpayers. Okay? We're going to say, fine, you've checked that box, you've said that. If that's wrong, it's wrong. But we're not an insurer of that professional, nor are we an insurer of the neighbor against downstream consequences. And you need to be cautious about over-promising and building expectations that are unrealistic and converting private disputes to public disputes. Those who discharge either gutter collection systems that funnel it out or a sump pump, those property owners are exposing themselves to liability. There is ample case law in Missouri that while it is the city's liability, if there is a dangerous condition on the sidewalk that leads, or the street, that leads to someone's injury, the city is liable. But if an adjoining property owner is using that to discharge their water and creating that in order to prevent them being inconvenienced by the water they're discharging, then they are picking up liability. So they are exposed that the injured party can turn around to them and say, aha, you caused this, and not the city and you are liable. So those property owners may be creating a public nuisance, in which case they are subject to our enforcement efforts for those things. But they are also exposing themselves to risk that they will be liable to those injured. I had a case not long ago where a property owner channeled their water too far and too close to the sidewalk, and it ended up sitting in a low spot on the sidewalk and constantly becoming moss-covered and slimy. And people got hurt on that slime, and they sued both the city and the property owner, and the property owner's efforts to get out were unsuccessful. They were held in until their insurer settled the case. So they have risk that they are taking if they are discharging water in that way. And even if we have a 10-foot setback from a discharge point or a 12-foot, the topography of the site, what's on the ground in those 10 feet, how deep it is, what kind of soil it is, all make a difference as to how effective it is. And we can't vary that regulation from site to site. We're not going to do soil testing for someone that's getting new gutters or someone that's putting on an addition. We're not going to try to second guess how effectively it will percolate at what rate. I understand how annoying it is to the neighbors, but that's why there are private causes of action against unreasonable conduct or private nuisances maintained by one property owner at the consequence to another. And I would caution against being so aggressive or taking such a point of view that we become the arbiter, or more importantly, the taxpayers become insurers of all of those conditions.
Nancy.
So suppose there was an ordinance about water runoff to an adjoining property, and there was an outside sealed stamp by someone else other than the city of Brentwood that said, oh yeah, we seal this, this is not gonna negatively impact the, we're gonna build some sort of retaining wall with water so it doesn't flood the house behind's basement, and someone beyond the city, before they get the building permit, has given the code. Is that sort of a reasonable thing that would keep the city out of liability?
First of all, I don't think the city has liability to begin with.
Right, but if it was sealed by someone else that said, oh yeah, if new addition
We
person,
have a
new
code
homeowner.
requiring an attestation by by a professional, and they give it to us, yes.
Something-
We do not increase our liability. Now, we may increase the expectation that it's gonna work and be, insure the neighbor, which of course we can't deliver.
Right.
But let's remember that one of the reasons for the principle of sovereign immunity is that when we are undertaking a duty to the public, which is what stormwater control is, the city is not liable if it's negligent or if it doesn't work or if something goes wrong. And that's so that the taxpayers don't become insurers of private disputes. Okay, so long answer to a short question. Requiring it was probably not increase the liability, but we don't have liability to begin with. That help?
Anybody else?
Someone, well, we can't really.
Well, could you come up to the mic, because we can't hear.
I'm Karen Noyes, and I live in York Woods, and that's my husband Bob, and we have a situation like this going on. I think I've talked to everybody here about it, where we have a neighbor we've newly acquired some property. So 3 years ago, we approached the neighbor that was taking two of their gutters and directing it like 40 feet across their property onto someone else's property. It wasn't ours at that time. It is now ours as of a few weeks ago, and it has created a problem for us in the last 3 years. And we've mentioned it to this homeowner with no avail. They don't really act on it at all. So, and I did look up that common enemy law. And my question for you is, what constitutes a container? I'm being told by the homeowner that, well, I'm following the natural grade, but I'm following it in a pipe and literally putting it right. We haven't determined whether they're 6 inches from the property line or a foot from the property line, or they're on our property. We're just getting the survey. So what does that mean?
I'm sorry, your name is?
My name is Karen Noyes.
Ms. Noyes? I'm sorry. I have no idea, and I cannot answer your question. I am not in a position to provide legal advice or
Okay.
technical advice to you. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Any other questions for anybody? I guess at this time, this was just all informational.
It's all information, and so that you would consider the presentation you've heard tonight, giving some of the concerns that have been expressed to you by your constituents and developing a path forward, because it seems that what I'm hearing tonight is there is really no city involvement in helping them resolve neighbor-to-neighbor issues. That is a civil matter. But in terms of new construction, there is an opportunity for the city to do a research with the assistance of Horner Schifrin and develop, it's a guideline. And I believe in our meeting the other day, Christy and Jim indicated to us that there are cities that you know of, and Dan has actually gone to the City of Kirkwood website and found their guidelines, and I've reached out to the city manager there to find out, cost, how they went about it, what kind of engagement, involvement there was or not. They just adopted theirs in 2018. So Lisa and her and Steve were unable to attend that meeting that day. So there's value in having them sit down and talk to Christy and Jim and then decide what is the best path forward for new construction for us.
Requiring
Could
a tap.
I just want to add one thing, because there's been discussion about, pipes in some older buildings, discharge pipes come up right up to the sidewalk. Aside from the liability, those kinds of especially subterranean features that are put in, we do not require people to change previously permitted construction to meet newer standards. Right? We don't go around and say, oh, when that building was built, we required 2-foot thick foundations. Now they're 3. You got to add another foot on it. Okay, so there are certain conditions which may subject the property owner, even if constructed as permitted, to later expose them to nuisance liability or liability for the condition of the sidewalk to an injured party. But we are not in a position to say you now have to change that permitted construction circumstance that was in compliance with the standards we had at the time it was built. So there are certain safety codes where we do require upgrades, but nothing in that character.
Well, do you need a task order? Is that what we're?
So we would need we would ask for a task order with Horner Schifrin, and but Lisa has not had a chance to sit. But I know, Lisa, you said you did review the Kirkwood guidelines. Do you want to? Are you in agreement? I guess that's the question.
So, delivered this morning. Honestly, it's 40-some pages, and I spent 10 minutes on it, so obviously it wasn't a thorough review. But, I would say some of it definitely has merit. Kirkwood, I think, models Brentwood, or maybe Brentwood models Kirkwood pretty well in terms of the density and the smaller lots. So I think it's worth still looking more into the document. But again, the first page is guidance, so a lot of it's best practice stuff, which doesn't hurt to publish things and get people more educated in terms of how they can control their drainage on their own property. So anyway, but I'll look into it more thorough, and as the city administrator said, we will also still sit down and have a little more discussion with Horner and Schifrin as well.
So no action tonight. They still need to develop the scope of work, and in meetings with Lisa, we will go through that process and bring that back to the committee
In July.
in July. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more question? So there are quite a number of properties that have water runoff that do create a public nuisance. And I know Dan has a whole stack of photos of frozen sidewalks and frozen driveways that go into streets, and there are a lot of those. And so I know it's not a neighbor to neighbor, and it's not a new construction. So are we going to try to make an attempt to deal with those?
So Mr. O'Keefe has provided us with a draft of a letter where, Dan, if you get to speak. So maybe Dan can speak to this.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's several different conditions throughout Brentwood that cause this problem. It could be gutter systems that drain across 2 impervious surfaces, driveway to driveway. It could be mechanical, where it's a sump pump for either an older or newer home. Or we've even run into, I know you guys would remember, the Cecilia-Salem issue. Whenever we graded Salem, we changed just a little bit of slope and it wound up pushing water over onto the property that abutted or actually fronted Cecilia. So we fixed that one in-house by adding the curb and doing a little bit of modification. So some of those we can do in-house with Public Works, but others we would need to enlist the help of a professional that could help us look at that and figure out what you could do to try to minimize that.
So Mr. O'Keefe has presented us with a draft of a letter that would allow us to put those residents on notice to some of the comments he said earlier, where a change or an improvement that they made on their property has now caused a public safety issue. So the city would be putting them on notice and give them a chance to make that improvement. We're also looking at partnering with MSD, and MSD has indicated that they would permit the city to connect to their drainage inlet.
If you remember some of those Project Clear projects that they proposed, like I know some of those are only at 60% design, but whenever they're fully done, they'll disconnect some of those. They're illegal or illicit connections, even though they were fine at the time. They're going to remove them from the combined sewer system and they'll be piped into a storm. So instead of draining, overflowing, and things of that nature, they'll correct some of those. Not everywhere, but in particular, I remember Rosalie and a couple other streets.
Where it cools real bad.
Right.
So generally, and we'll get to those items on the agenda tonight. I think this year is unique
Yeah, and we're expecting
in
more.
that we seem to be experiencing more cost than we have in our budget. Therefore, it will be a challenge to decide, and we'll make suggestions and rely on the committees, the various committees, to direct staff on the best path forward, because some of these costs are really not in the budget. So we'll be bringing more to your attention. Once we have that letter formalized, we will probably just include that in the city administrator weekly report before we send it out, so you all have notice before you start getting calls.
Thank you both.
Can I ask one clarification? I just want to make sure I understand the current state. So for new construction, the guideline is that all drainage has to end within 10 feet away from the property line, but that doesn't control existing drainage, correct?
It is an administrative policy, so
Not ordinance, it's just
nothing.
just when you do a site plan review, and nothing would prevent an existing homeowner, like if they had a gutter that was just going off the side of their house and they decided they wanted to, direct it closer to their property line, nothing would prevent them from doing that right now, correct?
Lisa, Steve, you want to step up?
But the way I would see it is, and that's the other issue we didn't really talk about. There are so many activities that people do in their backyards that do not require permits from the city. They're off the
Right.
radar, so to speak. So we could have the perfect system, next Monday. But then there's the maintenance of that system, whatever it is. And then it's also still, if someone 3 lots up, that still their drainage goes that way where gravity pulls, could impact that. But I guess to answer your question, then again, if someone went ahead and just moved the pipe and it was closer, those rules are written right now for new construction, and we probably would not catch it, but.
Not catch it, and there would be no violation or any code that would prevent them from doing it anyway, right?
There have been times when people have done basically that thing. Typically, we'll get a call from a neighbor, and we do go out and explain. I mean, in my mind, that's new construction, and that they need to shorten it to get back to the guideline that we require any new construction to do.
Okay, all right, thanks for the clarification.
With this one? All right, thanks everybody that was involved in this. And we'll wait for the July meeting. Moving on to number 8, the consent agenda. All we have is the minutes from last month's meeting. Any changes to those minutes? Motion to approve the
Approve
consent.
as submitted.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we're on to item 9, old business. We've got the updating of our current building codes. I guess that's you again, Lisa?
So if you remember, I think it was about 2 months ago, we provided a memo to this committee. And what we attempted to do in that first memo was, again, with our proposal of going from the 2009 ICC codes to 2018, we had researched, and we brought our visual along tonight, that stack of books in that chair is actually the 2018 suite of codes. So it takes a while to go through those books, but anyway, that's what we did, is we went through those and we were looking for all the changes in 2018. And really, you do get like kind of an aid from ICC as well. They don't leave you just to go through page by page, but they give you some direction as terms of what any of the changes would be. But then what we also had to do then obviously was go back from, or look at the 2018 and then see what would need to be done in terms of customizing those things to Brentwood and to bring it up from 2009. So that's what we've been doing the last couple months. This memo now in front of you, the objective of that was to show you that this would actually now be taken the next step to be written in ordinance form. So these are the changes we'd actually have to write out in an ordinance and you'd have to adopt. They'd be incorporated or codified into the code. So unless really you have some questions, we could just answer questions. I did want to also, we did talk to you a few months ago that one of our ideas also was to still let our builders know that this was being contemplated by the city. And so we went ahead and sent out a notice about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I guess, already. But we have a meeting scheduled, or an open house that's scheduled over at the rec center. And basically, we're just going to be over there from 4 to 5:30. We're going to give a quick little program at 4 o'clock and repeat it again at 5. The time is really to try to accommodate our contractors as well. But we sent out, we have like right at 300 now contractors registered with our MyGov program. So that's where the invitation list went. So these went out, as I said, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Hopefully someone will come. I don't know. We haven't really had anybody, even when in our meetings when we're moving closer to actual submitting of a building permit and construction, we've been telling people that for a while now, or the developers, like, oh, we're going to be going to the 2018 codes. And we really just haven't heard anything from the business community that there is much substantial in the way of changes, but this will still just be another opportunity. Hopefully, they can come and ask questions if they'd like. But maybe with the interest of time, I'll leave it at that unless you have questions that either Steve or I could answer, so.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question. Lisa, so because I think I understand this right. So the International Residential Code, is that just for single-family homes? And my question is about the sprinkler, the automatic fire sprinkler system. I just want to make sure that we're not deleting automatic fire sprinkler systems from larger residential, or like multifamily, larger.
My answer is single and 2-family, and yes, we're still admitting the sprinkler requirement. Is that right? Oh. Sorry. That's all right. Alderman Tice's question was, again, IRC is for construction of single and 2-family. Okay. And then the sprinkler requirement in homes is still, we're still accepting that, correct? We're not requiring that.
We are not.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure it was only for single or large. I wanted to make sure we weren't excluding sprinkler systems from larger buildings. So that was all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion to direct staff to prepare an ordinance to repeal the 2009 code and enact the 2018 ICC codes.
I believe before you move to that motion, they have to write the ordinance.
Well, we're just giving them
This is to
direction.
direct them.
Okay.
Yeah.
That you want just direction.
Yeah.
I'll make that motion.
You want a second?
I'll second that motion.
Yeah.
Brandon, do you have any questions?
Nope.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes.
Hang on, I lost my computer.
That's why I always
User
appreciate it.
error.
Move on to new business. Item A is request to go over the proposals for the survey services through the city of Brentwood. Is it you, Eric?
Although I reserve the right to call Dan or Lisa up here if they need. So we are seeking approval to choose a vendor to provide survey services. We issued the RFP for the purpose of providing property research, boundary, and topographical survey throughout the city of Brentwood in early March. We received 7 responses to the RFP. As I mentioned, Lisa, Dan, and myself reviewed those RFPs. After the initial evaluation, we brought in 4 for a more formal evaluation. We brought in CDI, Heidemann Associates, Horner and Schifrin, and TWM for a formal evaluation. After the formal evaluation, the 3 of us rescored, and we unanimously selected TWM as our choice for a couple main reasons. TWM has a process of creating a database for each property. It could be updated in real time. The city would actually have access to it, so we'd be able to see it as it's being updated in real time. That's the only company who provided that sort of level of service. They have equipment and personnel to deploy 15 survey crews at one time, so they can actually get the work done in a timely manner. TWM is currently working on the MoDOT project, so they've completed survey work, right-of-way establishment, area calculations, so they have a good understanding of what we're looking for in our project. And they're also using new technology such as LiDAR, mobile LiDAR, which is can be done, be able to do things quickly and accurately, up to a 16th of an inch to do the topographical survey. So TWM's been doing a lot of work since 1946. Been working with Creve Coeur, Richmond Heights, Wildwood, MoDOT. Staff has worked with them on a number of projects and always been satisfied with their work. As we talked a little bit more, when we received the responses, the proposed compensation ranged anywhere from $46,000 to $117,000. So that's a bit of a wide range there. And we discovered that the staff cost comparisons were almost identical. And I think that was part of one of the attachments that you guys had. So they're very close as far as their hourly rate. The big difference was the amount of hours that they're going to spend at each property. And so one of the things that we asked during the presentation was how they got to those different hours. And what we found was that that basically a couple of the contractors with the higher price followed the scope a little bit more accurately. And so specifically in two basic examples. So the RFP stated that the limit of existing right-of-way should be marked with rebar and survey caps every 100 feet. The contractors with the lower proposed fee did not include that in their costs and said that we really thought that was a little bit more of thought it was unnecessary. And the contractors with the higher cost said the same things, like, look, it's a little bit unnecessary. Really, you just survey both the property boundary lines. Every 100 feet's a little bit unnecessary, but the same right you asked for in the RFP, so we put it in the RFP, so that's why the hourly cost was high, and also why our proposal costs are so high. The same sort of thing for the legal description. Every company we talked to said, hey, most legal descriptions are actually written pretty well, and so we don't actually have to go and rewrite every legal description. If there's a variance and we need to rewrite one, we're happy to do so. The ones with the lower fee did not rewrite them or did not add the cost of those hourly rates. The ones with the higher costs did, and said, look, we thought was that we'd come and talk to you guys today and we'd be able to work that out. And so as we took out those two things in particular, you kind of see how we get a little bit more of an apples-apples comparison of the biggest portion of the RFP, which is the Rogers Parkway Swim Club portion of it. So the idea is that if we get approval, we'll work with the approved contractor to kind of refine the scope, make sure we understand exactly what the contractor and the city wants to get done, and make sure we tighten up everything as we move forward. So as we start this project, something that came up at the end of last year, so it's an unbudgeted project, but we did find about $20,000 from those three accounts that we mentioned that we could pull from. And what we'll do is once we select a vendor, we can complete what we can this year and then budget accordingly in 2020. So that is our recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions or defer to Dan.
Chairman, thank you.
Go ahead, Andy.
I'll yield to you. My question is going to be.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, so TWN is the second most expensive, and the reasons you've listed of why you're selecting them. One is that they would create a database. Was that a part of the RFP to create that database, or is that just additional scope that they're adding on to their proposal?
No, it wasn't, and it's not something that I think that they're adding on to the cost. It's just an added value to what they can do. That's not something that's actually included in their cost. It's just part of what they're doing as part of their work.
Okay, but that wasn't a requirement of the RFP that we sent out to create a database?
No, it was not.
Okay, and then how do we know, so if the RFP included those two items of the legal and the posts, would the contract that we cut with the supplier basically take those actions out so we wouldn't be paying the extra cost of that?
Yeah, the idea is once we get the approval, we would refine the scope. I think once Lisa, Dan, and I talked to all the contractors, we felt that 100 feet was probably unnecessary as well. And then we understood that the writing the legal descriptions probably also wasn't necessary as well. And we'd be working with the contractor to see if there's any other unnecessary parts of the RFP.
Okay, and then last question. So you listed reasons why you thought the second most expensive bidder was selected. Any issues with the lowest price bidder, with them performing the work?
Which is Heidemann. Heidemann, we thought, could do a very good job with the survey aspect. They're kind of and Dan can help me out, kind of very good sort of the stone is the stone kind of survey company, and could do all that. But they didn't have as much of a better understanding. I shouldn't say understanding, but they didn't have as much resources for the topographical work as TWDM did.
So that would be staff, personnel, and is
Equipment.
it technology and
Technology,
equipment?
yeah.
So those were other conditions that we took into consideration.
But were those requirements in the RFP that they would not be able to meet or in the contract?
No, it wasn't a requirement, but it basically it makes the TWM able to do the job more efficiently and better, and provide a better end product.
So maybe what Eric could expatiate on for Alderman Weggie is the scoring methodology that the three of you used to eliminate each one of these submittals. I don't know if that would add value or not.
Sure, I mean, if I'm happy to do so. The idea is, if you look at the scoring survey sheet, is the qualifications. Obviously, most of the companies have been doing this and been doing it for a while. TWM just had a broader range of doing overall work, from surveying and topographical research, whereas some of the other groups just had, like Heidemann had a little bit more just the surveying part of it and didn't do as much topographical work. The related project experience, they're all very close if you notice the scores there. The service providing key personnel, again, TWM had just a greater resources, so they had more available staff. If you go to Heidemann, who's like the lowest one, they only had 4 crew members in their entire department, so you're kind of set with just those 4. The past record of performance, again, was pretty close across the board. And then the hourly breakdown explanation, I think TWM gave us a great explanation of what it was, and really was able to explain how they could help the city refine the scope a little bit more as well. Dan, did I miss anything on that?
Andy?
All right. First of all, purpose of disclosures. In this project, one of the 8 that are on this particular proposal is my north neighbor to work with, and I am a encroaching party to the city property. I do believe I can handle and work through this program without a conflict of interest, but I will subject myself to the board if you would like me to withdraw from participating to work with. Second arrangement, if there are no objections. I'm a little confused as to where we are in the process. When we started this last year, it was identified to the committee that the city really does not know where all of the city properties and right-of-ways and things may truly exist and which ones they are. You've gone out for an RFP to identify 8 potential areas in the city that you would like to hire a survey crew to go out and survey and mark the properties. I thought we were first going out to have someone go through the Department of Real thing to go through and identify what properties have city adjustments to it. So I misunderstood what we were talking about last year.
Right.
And
We never said that. We identified the 8 to start off with, knowing fully well that there is a potential for others. So once we start this 8 and hire an engineering firm to go out and start to do the work, this will give us an opportunity to identify others. And is that correct?
Yeah, I think at first it was actually just swim club and the alley on White. And as we developed that, then I think the other 6 came on board.
Right.
Started popping up.
Right, and part of it, and maybe it wasn't part of my thing, part of the scope is to make sure the legal boundaries are appropriate, and they're doing that through the survey as well. They're going to county to make sure that they get the legal descriptions, make sure there's no sort of encroachment or any sort of, I'm always the wrong words there, Dan. Easements
Yes.
and those type of things, yeah. So that is part of the scope as well, to kind
But
of do
they'll
that sort of
only
research.
survey what we tell them to go survey this section.
Correct.
And from there, somebody's going to walk up and get the plat map and go, okay, now let's find the points and let's figure it out.
Find the
and we'll-
markers, yeah,
we'll identify it.
exactly.
I was under the impression that when you first came to us, we wanted to try to identify what city properties and easements were out there throughout the entire city of Brentwood. And the only way to easily do that was to get through the records that St. Louis County has. We don't need to go survey. We just have to get an idea of where these things are, which ones exist. From there, we can choose if a survey is absolutely necessary. But to go have somebody right now go survey Swim Club Road and Rogers Parkway, we just spent 2 years with Mr. Beinbeck going through that whole issue. And I don't know that paying to have a survey done does anything to improve the city's standing. We know what it is and how we got there. We just want to know where are the areas. By going through the plat maps, that legal description will already be there. So I can do a bookworm person versus doing a survey field crew to literally go out and start marking points that by rights are already on the plat maps. So why am I duplicating a surface? If we first want to understand where and what easements do exist out there, we have to do the paperwork side first to identify it. Versus why am I going to go survey something that's already on a plat map that we evidently haven't gone and looked at? But the survey team will go do that to pick up a legal description when you go say, let's go look at the 4 houses along York that have the white, the old walkway that's been abandoned in it. And somebody goes, okay, let's go find it. That walkway would be on those plat maps already. So I don't need to resurvey it. I just need to define what it is and what it is that's there. And have we vacated it in any way, shape, or form?
The purpose of the survey, from my understanding, and
Go ahead.
I'm not quite the engineer, and Dan might be able to help me with this. From my understanding, when I was asked to put this together, is on top of what you're saying of finding out the ownership of the property, because from my understanding, there is some question on ownership on some of the smaller pieces of property, of whether the city does own those or not. Is secondarily is to do the survey to find out if there is any encroachment onto those pieces of property. So to use White as an example, if that pathway is owned by the city, that's kind of the first question. Let's find out if we own that pathway. Secondarily, if we do own that, then if we need to figure out if we're going to maintain that pathway and with what, we also need to figure out if there's been any encroachment onto that pathway so that we then know to either work with the owner to get back that pathway or whatnot so we can then properly put in a pathway, or have to work with, I guess, some sort of easement with that owner and figure out what to do conversely against that. Swim Club Lane and Rogers Parkway, I think, was another area where there's been, from what I understand, and again, I'm not involved with this, many properties have encroached over the years. And part of the understanding of doing this originally was to find a true understanding of the exact boundary lines and who has encroached on that boundary lines. So that was my understanding, is I was asked to put this together with those first 2, and then is grown from 2 to 8.
And your plat map's not gonna, as Eric's saying,
Yes.
it's not gonna show, if you've got one running through you, what you've done there, if you put up a fence there since.
No, that will not show on that. But the limit is what we first wanted to establish is, are there places within our city boundaries that the city has right-of-ways or easements through that we, the city, have no knowledge of? Those plat maps will tell you the answer to that question. The limit is you have to go through the 4,000 different plats to find that. Now, the minute you start running through some of them, you'll get different subdivision arrangements that will have them.
down all the way to the individual lot that if you want to look at. That was where I thought we were headed with this. From there, now you can go in and determine, do we want to do anything with these, leave them the way they are, or yes, we want to do something, let's survey it and determine it to work with.
Yeah, I don't
You're
recall
jumping
that.
to a point
These
where.
are the ones
don't
we
recall.
know there's a potential that we want to do something with. So let's get started with this and give us time to research the 4,000 other pages. So we're not just at this point where we're doing nothing. This
Yeah.
is what this gives us an
Well,
opportunity
I
to
think
do.
my
Okay.
understanding is a little bit
You've got
different.
to, you've got to explain, why do you want to go out and physically survey something that you haven't even researched to prove does exist that you may or may not have? We suspect these 8 to work
We
with.
don't suspect. We've had a
Well,
resident come
the-
and met with Alderman Lockmiller and I, where there is a city trail that is in poor condition. There's a tree in the middle of it. I don't know how old the tree is. We've been told that there is a public safety issue there. There are a lot of families and children that use these paths to get to the school or to different facilities that we have in the city. So when we talk about public safety, I think there's a responsibility for the city to research that so that we can bring this back to the committee and decide what the plan of action should be.
And I'm sorry if it's not well stated in the memo, but the first step on each of these, well, Rogers Parkway is not inclusive. I mean, the RFP, Rogers Parkway kind of had its own little section, and then the other 7 smaller sections had kind of their own deal. But the other 7 sections, which are the smaller sections, the very first step is to determine ownership. So it is to figure out, does the city own those? Is there a easement, or is there something that gives the city ownership first? If there's not, then we're not going to survey that because we don't own it at that point. If it is, and we think, let's take White as an example, we do think we own White. If it is, then we would do the survey, try to figure out if there's encroachments, if there's easements, those type of things, so then we can then properly maintain that area in the future. The first issue on a lot of those things, again,
I'll make the suggestion, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to the city administrator. I can save you a large cost on surveying the Rogers Parkway and Swim Club Road by asking the city to go back to Mr. Dimebeck's complete review and establishment of the entire Swim Club Road issue that we did as a full city assignment. And that will go and address your whole issue of whether or not ownership is there and what and how we got acquired or have some type of responsibility. And I don't think you need to go out and send a survey team to resurvey that whole issue. And that will cut out the largest expense that you have out of the 8 projects.
Eric, this wasn't just Swim Club, aren't we talking from Manchester Road all the way to Strassner?
And that's
Yeah,
what we did.
it's Manchester to Strassner.
That Mineback only,
Lineback went all the way
No.
through the entire right-of-way.
Not to
read-
Strassner.
it didn't go to,
No,
it did not go down to Manchester Road,
Took
Andy.
it all the way down. If you'll take a look
The
at
Strassner?
if you'll look at his
We'll
full
check.
report, because we went through it very, very carefully.
No, you're right, I think it did go to Strassner, but I think, what is that, Rosalie? I think it started at Rosalie.
No, he took it where we picked it up, where it came off of Manchester Road, because the whole question came down to is that whole parkway and walkway, the cities, to do what we did to.
So maybe what the request is just for an approval of staff's recommendation for the selection of a provider, an engineer, to help us with this. And then we can start to address some of the other items on the list and hold off on Swim Club at this point. We're just looking to move forward.
Brandon?
So if Nancy doesn't have any questions, I'll defer to her first, and then I'm prepared to make a motion.
No questions.
Yeah, so I would make a motion that we proceed with the lowest cost bidder. I mean, they scored a little lower in the evaluation criteria, but they were second highest. And if staff has no concerns of their ability to meet the requirements, I make a motion we proceed with Heidelman. Save $5,000.
One's gonna second. Motion dies, lack of a second.
Mr. Chairman, I like what Mr. Alderman Wiggy is suggesting. Financially, it makes reasonable sense. I would like to ask Mr. Wiggy if he'll entertain an amendment to his proposed motion before I would proceed to second. Is that permissible, sir?
What is
Is
the
that your
motion?
Steve?
Are you asking me or asking?
I
Yeah,
need to-
go ahead. And
Since you have no second on his motion, may I ask to amend his motion?
The motion's dead, so I would
Yeah.
say make a motion.
All right. May I then?
I'd like to make a motion. Go
I
ahead.
will make the motion to select Hyden and Associates to, I guess, come under contract with the city of Brentwood to help with the identification and locations of these 8 potential sites with the Swim Club Road and Rogers right-of-way to be postponed until the city's had a chance to review Mr. Beinbeck's earlier reports to the city on that properties, or those properties.
Nobody wants a second?
Okay.
All right. It does
Nancy-
too.
At least it's my second meeting,
Eric, can
not
I,
my first.
How valuable is it?
Eric, as far as the Rogers Parkway and using TWM, with the rebar and the database that will be created, will this be useful in the future with the GRG coming through?
Yeah, I mean, the ability of what TWM can provide, and I think Dan might be able to help me a little bit more on this, is the ability for them to be able to put it in the database, which is putting it into a CAD file, and I forgot the other file, which is something that Heidemann could not do. It was something they could not do. Is a shape file, yeah, thanks. Is then it gives the city the ability to then hand that over to anyone in the future and then be able to use it in a easy convertible way. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to properly say that. I am not an engineer. I'll freely admit that. And that's why, that's kind of the benefit of TWM, is being able to, in the future, even, for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now, that data will still be good, and being able to put into someone, another contractor's stuff very easily, where Heidemann was not able to do that.
Because I know when we wanted to, the citizen came to try to do the improvement there at the Bridgeport White. I mean, Dan had to go out and we had to look at Google Maps. We had to try to pull up what we could from the county, and it was all just kind of archaic. But in the future, if we want to do anything with these, we would have the live database that we could pull from right away,
Right.
which would show all the encroachments or anything that we would
Whereas
need to do in
with
that
Heidemann,
area.
and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe all we get is a paper document, correct?
Yeah, and they would probably convert it to PDF or something, but Eric's point was that the shape file allows you to basically use it for future. Have a digital file that you could give to a PDS or whoever you decided that would develop that greenway, and they would actually have the groundwork already done. The only thing they said was, like, your contours, if there's any grading done in there, you'd probably redo those. So they suggested that you don't do anything if you're not planning on developing that in the next few years.
Brandon, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm not disagreeing with the value of the shape file or shapefile. If that's a requirement or if that's a deliverable we want from the survey firm, then that should have been in the RFP. I mean, it seems like scope growth, it's a desirable, it's a nice to have. If that's a requirement, then we should include that as a deliverable.
Bola, would it be possible to go back to these companies and try to get it more apples to apples with this type of?
We could, and we did go back to clarify. That's why we were able to isolate what the proposed fee is and the revised proposed fee. So I would think that we can go back and ask them the same question for clarification, and then bring that back to the committee.
Yeah, we could. We not knowing how how to get exactly apples to apples, because to be completely honest, if you really think about the way the scores of the RFP, Heidemann and some of the other ones who are lower honestly just did not complete the RFP properly because they didn't score. They did not give us a full true score. And again, on the RFP, the cost is only one component of the total score. Happy to do it. Happy to kind of see what we can get from everyone. And the thing with TWM, and Dan can correct me again if I'm wrong, is that even the other company, which I believe was CDI, even though they're higher, was that the idea of refining the scope was they think there's even more cost savings. We didn't go through that in that first exercise with them because we weren't sure who we would choose at that point. So,
But the question I hear is the part where there seems to be scope growth would be the only one, Alderman Weggie, that we would go back and get clarification on. Is that correct?
I'm not.
Or
I'm not. It's an action. I'm just saying, if we're using that as a rationale for a 20% increase over, a bidder that was only 4% different in the final scoring, then we need to going forward, we need to make that as a deliverable and requirement. And I'm not accepting that that's enough rationale to increase the cost by 20%.
Right. Was the issue that wasn't in the,
And I believe so. We weren't aware that anybody could deliver that until we read the RFP.
right, it came
And,
back
and then
with
it
TW.
became valuable for us to have. Because a lot of these projects that will result from the survey, I think the one where we spoke to the resident, the city will probably have to address that in the near future, meaning next fiscal year. Because she indicates there is a lot of traffic on that pathway. So, just leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, then, let's give some direction here. Brandon, do you want to at least set some direction on what you would like to have Eric do?
No, I mean, I stand by my original dead motion that we should move forward with the lowest cost bidder on this and take that to the board to proceed with a recommendation to proceed to that. I guess the other option in my mind would be, let's revise the RFP process and go back out again. And if that's a differentiating feature that we would like, let's put that in and have everybody bid it.
I would not be opposed to the latter.
Yeah.
Go back
Yeah.
out.
Okay, well, let's do that then. Well,
That's good.
somebody want to make a motion?
So what that means is that this resident, when they contact the board, there's a delay, and we can
We're still
explain
working on
why.
it.
We're still working on it.
So, and I just want to clarify, is this meaning that this RFP is dead and we
Yes.
just, so
Yes.
the other option, and I'm just throwing this out there, if this RFP is dead, is something we discussed
Yes.
at the last meeting, which is instead of going RFP for all this, is doing a
On call.
on-call service where we basically get, because we figured out that this has happened a lot to us, where we have a need for a on-call surveyor or topographical service for this, and we can basically try to get multiple people for an on-call service. So instead of doing RFP for this, we do an RFP for on-call services, get 2 or 3, and then develop smaller task orders for each of them and go that route. It's something we were discussing we mentioned this at the last committee meeting. So, if this RFP truly dead, we could just go straight to an on-call.
I think due to the magnitude of this, we're looking at $25,000 to $30,000 on this. I think the batching this is worth going back through the RFP, but I do still support an on-call for smaller jobs as they arise.
We'll be back in July. Thank you.
Probably not July if it has to go back out.
August, September.
Thank you.
Okay, where are we at?
And B,
10C?
B,
Oh, and B.
Bobby.
All right, item 10B. I was hoping we were further along, I guess.
You're close.
Dan, I guess is you, the street projects for 2019.
Actually, you get to hear from me for the next 5. So, we have lots of RFPs out there. I don't know if you had a chance to look at this comparison table. And just to give you some background on it, what we've done over the last few years is not only do we have our base bids, things that we absolutely want to do, but then in past years, we've actually had a surplus. So what we've done is we actually throw in an alternate, something we might consider in the next successive budget cycle. So that's what we did here. That's why you see these other task orders or for the alternates, like A1 was ice cream specialties. So there's several slabs that we saw out there that it's too large of a project for us to really do in-house. So we wanted to know, well, what would a contractor charge us, and so on and so forth. And then we were also asked about swim club, which is item A4. So we bid these, we opened bids on May 31st. We received 4 bids, 4 bidders actually submitted on these. And then you see what was actually in the budget book. So it says adopted FY 2019 and what that dollar amount was, and then what each of those 4 contractors thinks it's really going to cost. So we had budgeted roughly $61,000 for the base, and West is actually the lowest for the base at $122,000. So there's a delta there of roughly $61,000. And then, as I mentioned, we were asked to look at these alternates. Swim club, it's interesting enough, I had budgeted $42,000 last year. It came in roughly $35,000, and then this year you can see that the lowest is Krupp at $52,000-ish. So that's gone up quite a bit. We've called them, we've asked them. They said, part of it's material, part of it's labor. Also due to the complexity for Strassner and Brentwood because of traffic control. So if you're going to pave from like where the county line for their, because the county owns Brentwood Boulevard. So if you start at the county line and move your way east or west of that intersection, there's quite a few traffic lanes that they're going to have to block. And that's part of the reasoning why they said it increased, because usually we would use a historical cost per square foot. We multiply by the square footage, we increase at a certain percent year over year. And we, last year we had a surplus. So if you recall, we used the surplus. We did mill and overlay of Hatton. We also used the surplus to do some of those MAQS streets. So we actually sealed Kempton, we sealed Sonora, and then we sealed Madge, and then we back billed Missouri American, who actually paid for Madge. But that's just to let you know, like, what we typically do, and this is kind of an extreme case where we don't have enough money. So what I did try to prepare, since this cascades down to the other ones, or some of the other ones, like the MAQS, actually I can use a different line for that, but as far as the other RFP, which would be the ADA, that's why I put together, there's a summary sheet showing what's happening financially to the capital line, the 4000006535. So I wanted to let you know where that money is moving back and forth. And then to get to the point, there would be a need for a budget amendment if you want to do those base streets because of that $61,000 delta. And then when we get to the other ones, you'll see that the ADA is like roughly $69,000. And then we didn't get any bids for the streetlights, which we'll talk about later. So I didn't know if you had any questions in particular just on the street projects. Looking for direction on, do we want to do those 4 base, knowing that it's going to cost extra? And also, what about swim club? Swim club, again, is roughly $52,000. Spoke with Krupp Construction. They were the low bidder for just that job, and they said they would hold that number at $52,000 because they said, well, if you built an economy of scale because you're spreading your insurance and your overhead over multiple jobs, let me know what it actually is. If it's not going to be 52, what is it? And then we would also ask that for the second lowest bidder. But they said they could do just that one if you want to do that one. But we don't have $52,000 in the budget in 2019 just for that job, if that makes sense. So it's kind of 2 different motions, I guess I would be looking for. It's like, do you want to do the alternates, which would be those 4, and the low bid was the $122,414, or do you want to take something out, or do you want to do a budget amendment again and do those 4? And then same question on A4, which is swim club. Would you want to consider that? And if you do consider it, then we need to look at the money end.
Swim Club wasn't in this year's budget originally, correct?
Correct. It was actually kicked out to 2023. And part of the reason why it was postponed from last year is because they were trying to figure out if they were going to do a special assessment and actually do improvements. And they didn't want the city to pave that road, and then they would do the improvements and tear the road up in less than a year. So at the end of 2018, there was no real direction. You know, they didn't have their plans submitted. They didn't have permits. And I'm trying to remember if they didn't get their permits until this year, 2019, when they were, and I know they
Came in.
right, they started doing work without a permit and got shut down.
Came in 2 days later and said,
Right.
yeah, and we did it.
Yeah, but we budgeted for Swim Club Lane last year.
That is
And I
correct.
remember we had a conversation that, you know, if we didn't spend it in 2018, you know, we could just, I thought we could actually move it over the 2019. But either way, we had budgeted for it in 2018 and we're prepared to pull the trigger on it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think West was your selected contractor.
They were
and-
last year, yes.
And
that's
he
correct.
told us he would hold that bid if we delayed for the construction.
That was roughly $35,000.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and they would have done it in 18 for that amount, but then when we didn't know that we were actually going to do it, we just went ahead and got a deduct for that, took that $35,000 savings
Put
and
it
applied
elsewhere.
it towards
We
Hatton
spent
Mill
it.
and Overlay because, you know, Hatton's a through street, you know, it connects two different streets, and this is a seasonal road.
So Dan, you're saying that Krupp is willing to do just A4 for 52,000, the price bid, even if they don't have the base?
Yes, that is correct.
So I would make a motion to proceed with West for the base and then use Krupp for A4. And with the associated budget amendment if we need to do that.
I'll second the motion.
I'm sorry, I'm confused.
Well, he's pretty much do everything West has on those 4 projects and add Swim Club in there, so we're looking at a total of 175.
Yes. And then we have to do a budget amendment to cover that cost because we're spending money we haven't.
Budgeted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now,
Correct.
is that 170,000 reasonable to come out that we can adjust the budget to make this happen?
I
Or-
don't have my budget book with me, but if we have Karen here, so Karen can speak to what the December 31st, 2018 fund balance is for the capital improvement fund.
Where it would come from in savings is really a Dan question. I read his memo and I think he was trying to explain it, but if he can't find it in savings, it comes out of fund balance. That's the bottom line, because we didn't budget for, 60-something thousand in streets is what he budgeted, and now it looks like it's like double that. And then adding these other streets and that, what is it, 170 grand you're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have the 52 for base.
But don't you have savings that you've mentioned somewhere? Something else?
Yeah.
Well, his savings is for something else.
It gets
So it
better.
will be fund balance.
All right. Mr.
But-
Chairman, may I?
Let's go ahead, Andy.
If we pull from fund balance, our policy is that if we reach enough of a drawdown that we have to at least have a way to repay that back into the fund balance?
It's not that we have to repay it. It's if it falls below 10%, then it becomes a cause of concern for the Board of Aldermen. But it
Does-
doesn't say you have to pay it back. It's just,
Right.
but I don't think that's going to drop you that much lower than the percentage you guys
It won't
have set.
apply in this
Thank you.
situation.
That was where I was headed. I wanted to know where it fell
We're at
into the
40,
lines.
44, 45%, I don't know what
Right,
that
right.
number is.
Right.
I think it's 50%.
Our policy is 50%, and I think we're 45 or 46.
Right.
Correct.
And just for clarification, so this exceeds the budget by $61,000 for the base. And we had 42,000 last year that we did not spend that we had budgeted for Swim Club Lane. So I assume that went into general fund balance when we did the budget amendment in January.
No,
It did not go into
No, it
fund
did
balance.
not.
We
I think he
used
said
that
he
for
used
the
it.
alternates.
Okay.
So, yeah, we spent it.
correct,
Other streets.
Hatton and the ceilings.
right.
So you're pulling 170-something thousand out of your fund balance to make this project happen this fiscal year
Right,
to work.
No, it's
not that much.
61,000 plus 52,000.
correct.
110
So total is 170, what is that number?
For this project.
Yeah.
Give me a gross total.
62,000 plus
52,000, so 114,000
114.
Okay.
approximate. Chainsaw math.
Other questions?
Are there other, I mean, I know it's only July or June, but are there other significant things that you all foresee right now that need to come out of fund balance?
They're on these.
I mean, are they coming, and beyond the things coming down on the agenda today?
That's all we know about right now.
Oh, okay, I know it's only June, but yeah, okay.
I don't think we've taken anything out of fund balance over
No.
budget since I've been here.
No, so this is an anomaly, as I mentioned at the
Okay,
beginning.
okay.
Yes.
But you've got 4 of them.
Right.
For first.
First.
All right.
Thank you, Keith.
Any other questions?
So you need a motion? Okay.
Well, I believe we have a motion.
Well,
Brandon made the motion.
Yeah, I seconded.
She seconded.
Yeah. Since, do we have to do anything as far, so this is what the budget amendment will say, is
Yes.
it's coming out of reserves. Okay, and we need roll call for that.
Chairman Lockmiller,
Yes?
Alderman Leahy,
yes.
Alderwoman Tice,
Yes.
and Alderman Weggie.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, move down to 10C and
I'm,
this, go ahead.
educate me if I may, Bill. What we've just approved still has to go to the full Board of Aldermen
Yes,
Right.
to
yes.
get them to approve
Yes.
it. This is our recommendation
Right.
to them. Thank
Right.
you. We didn't just authorize.
No.
Thank you. Little foggy today. I apologize.
Okay, I guess this is you, Dan, on the ADA site accessibility for the,
This was
City
also
Hall.
another RFP that we'd gone out for bids on, received bids, just 2 of them on May 31st. The 2 that are listed, Pavement Solutions and Burn and Jones, you can see the difference there. Burn and Jones had a disclaimer that if they were to receive all 3 jobs, they would reduce their cost by $5,395 down to $86,260, which is still significantly higher than Pavement Solutions, which is roughly $69,000, round number. And this in particular is for City Hall. Over here on the west, it would include a ramp, an ADA compliant ramp coming out of the front entrance to Brentwood Boulevard. Over on the north side, there's a few ADA stalls that would have to be included. You know, there are some now, but they're not actually compliant. They're just marked, or I don't believe that they are. That's the way it was explained to us by the engineer. And then on the east side, the library side, they would modify those existing, which are okay, and they would actually widen the sidewalk. So I included the plans with the board doc so you can kind of see an aerial view of the 3 areas we're talking about. Those 3 areas added up again to $68,917.20 with Pavement Solutions. And again, this would come out of that 65-35 line, but out of the 100,000, which would be sidewalks and curbs, which means you would reduce that significantly on that line. That's why I tried to include the scorecard. So if you do this, this is what it does to that summary, because we only had budgeted, I believe it was 274,000 round number for 65-35, which also includes, $20,000 for the engineering studies, which 9,800 of it is earmarked for McKnight Road study, and then another 10,000 we were going to shove over towards the survey that we just talked about with Eric. So a lot of this money's already been earmarked, and then this, of course, you need more money if you're going to do this. This is another one of those that would be a budget amendment, and it's in that table where it says budget amendment, yes, no, and what the dollar amount is.
Andy?
If I may, and I guess I'll ask you, Dan, but Bola, if you can help. We have to do the ADA adjustments because we're remodeling City Hall. And because of what we're doing, we now fall into the rule. My question is this was not picked up in the remodeling cost? We've just missed putting it included? How did we miss it? Or it was something we just overlooked, or I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that we missed it.
No, I believe that the architects thought that they didn't have to do anything with the exterior and only the interior. And then when we met with our ADA coordinator,
That's
she
when it
told
became
us,
yeah,
you can't just do the inside, she wants the outside.
right,
So we deferred to the expert on ADA and, you know,
This is Terry,
yes.
yes.
Terry.
and I have confidence in what she's directing.
That's
Thus-
why we went to her.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, she actually
Exact-
reviewed the plans. She reviewed both the remodel and these plans and agreed.
But she reviewed the remodeling then. Why didn't she catch it then? She's that good. I know she is.
I don't believe that she received the draft copies. It was once we had gotten like almost to 100% submittal, then we gave those to her. She wasn't part of the initial process, if I recall correctly.
Is it possible to just do one of these and kick the other two to next year?
The way I looked at it was it made more sense to do alternates 1 and 2 because if you're parked on that north side, it's closer to that transformer that's out there, the big green transformer in the corner. It's ADA van accessible. You'd be able to park there, get out. They redo the sidewalk going north and south to get you up to this ramp, and then you can go up the ramp. And once you're in here in the newly remodeled City Hall, you've got full range of this floor. So I would do those two. What's over on the library side, you've already got 2 stalls, and people can actually navigate that now to get to the elevator. So if you were going to break it up, I would suggest alternates 1 and 2 are combined. The only thing is, if you did do 3, there might be additional cost because you'd have to modify your plans to, you know, X out the other 2 that would have in theory been done in 2019, and then the other one in
But
2020.
if we stage it so that they start toward the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, I see what you're saying, 2
and
budget
then
cycles.
It gives us
Yeah.
a chance to fund it next year.
Next year, yeah.
And we're not going to be ready for all of this calendar
That's correct.
year. So that makes good
Yes.
sense if you can delay
Yes,
to pick it up. That way you're not adjusting that much.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, we could ask the contractor, because the only other thing would be like mobilization, remobilization. If you did these 2, you can't obviously pour when it's super cold, but if you did it in, say, October, you know, you'd probably have to wait until early 2020 when the weather breaks in, say, March to do
Yep.
the east side. You know, we can ask that
We can
question if they'd
ask.
be able to hold that
We can
value,
ask.
that number.
So I guess we'd need a motion to do alternatives 1 and 2 and push 3 off till next year. Does that make sense?
$42,900 for this year. And then do the other 26,000 in 2020's budget.
Want to make that motion, Andy?
So moved. Move to authorize funding 42,800, I'm sorry, 42,900 for alternates 1 and 2 in the fiscal year 2019 with a budget amendment using Pavement Solutions and working the alternate 3 for $26,013 into the fiscal year 2020 budget.
I'll second that.
Dan, is there?
There would be a budget amendment because you still wouldn't have the 24 or the 18,000.
Yeah, you don't have that.
And where's that coming from? Where are the funds?
The general fund.
General fund?
I mean,
I was going to say,
Capital.
yeah,
it has to be capital, but
Yeah,
I got a question, Bo.
Yeah, 65-35 was
If we
what-
keep doing that and we keep drawing, would it be individual activities that would draw down that budget, or is it a gross amount as a
gross
budget?
amount.
And then we get
Gross
into
amount.
that level?
It's a gross amount.
Okay, so does this again affect us to a level?
It won't.
We still have cushion? Okay,
I guess we need a roll call on this one, too.
yep,
One more question.
Go
So
ahead.
we have a $100,000 budget line item, and for all 3, it's 68,000. So where's the 14,000 that we don't have covered in the budget coming from? I guess I'm confused. I know I'm confused.
You're pulling some of that 100,000 on the other action we just did with the streets. You can't keep pulling more and more from it.
right.
So you're trying to, if I have to draw against it, I'm trying to reduce as much of the draw as possible.
The city would like to still be able to do some sidewalk projects, which is why we're not recommending we take all of that difference from the 100,000 that's budgeted for streets and sidewalks.
Okay, so we have the budget to do all three. We're saying we'd rather spend that money in other places this
Right.
year. That's why we want to split it up.
Right.
But the motion that's on the table now is that all three would be done. We would just split them across the year.
The
Right.
physical budget.
2 years.
Cycles.
All right, any other questions? Can we go to roll call? All right, Shelley.
Alderman Lockmiller,
Yes.
Alderman Leahy,
Yes.
Alderwoman Tice,
Yes.
and Alderman Wiggy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, item 10D is additional streetlight project, and I think this is just an update, is it?
Well, this is an interesting one because we actually did bid this and the bids were due last week in this room last Thursday and we didn't receive a single one. Typically what we do is, we advertise, of course it's in the county and like we're supposed to, and then we also try to solicit vendors we've done work with just in case they don't read it and make sure that we get some bids. So we had solicited Meyer, who did Strassner and Hanley Industrial just last year with the STP. And then we also solicited Gersner, who's done work. They did Rose Avenue. And then they also replaced the lights and did some work over on Litzinger as part of that STP. So we thought we were getting at least two or at least one, and we received zero. So now my question is, if I submit another RFP, do the whole process over, what if I get the same result as there's zero? So you're basically wasting another month or, kind of spinning your wheels until the bids come due and you may get the same thing, or I hope not. But my suggestion was, what if we did quotes, we go contact at least 3 vendors, get quotes, have them fill out that bid table like they normally would, and then bring that back and say, here are my 3 quotes. Or if allowed, we could send it through the capital approval format like we do for things over $500, but this is actually going to be more than 10,000, which would trigger the RFP. But it would still go to finance, it would still go to the city administrator. Here are 3 quotes, this is our recommendation. We would still write a recommendation memo just like we normally would. Here are the quotes. That way it saves some time. Otherwise we have to wait, bring these back to the committee in July, and we've spent another 4 weeks, and what if we didn't get anything again? That was the fear. And this was just for 20 lights, thought it was gonna be an easy thing. Somebody wants to put in conduit, right? And nobody. And Ameren requires the conduit, and Ameren doesn't put in the conduit. You have to put it in for them. They bring the light that we already purchased last year, put it in, and there's pull tape in there, so they pull the wiring they already purchased, and then they'll, make it live with whatever the source is. But otherwise, we don't move for another month or so.
I'm very comfortable with that suggestion. And do you need a motion to do this?
Well,
I mean,
to do something of that nature, we have to then violate the purchasing policy because we're looking at
Right,
something
and that's what
over
I-
$10,000.
Yes.
Or what we anticipate should be over $10,000.
Oh, guaranteed. Yeah, you're doing 20 lights, conduits, definitely over 10,000.
And I'm not comfortable skirting our own policies.
Right.
That's my.
That's my dilemma. It's like,
Yeah. I
either we
think-
do it again and
yeah.
hope for better results, or we get quotes and try to do something unique.
In the 2 firms that you reached out to,
Mhm.
did you get any feedback to them as to why they did not look at it or they would not bid it? Or is there something
I
that
think
we
they
did?
were busy. I'm speculating, but I did send it, and I know that they received it because they're like, "Thank you,
Yep.
for sending this to us. We're interested." And then we didn't see anything. And I thought, well, maybe they got busy. It's a little over a 2-week turnaround for them to look at 20 locations. Maybe they had other projects.
Yeah, too tight to do.
But yeah, we just needed some guidance. It's like either we do the same thing and hope for better results. We could still reach out to those 2 and then try to hammer another 3 firms. I sent one to somebody today saying, this is what we did. We didn't receive anything. Is this something that your firm would be interested in?
yeah,
What's the sense of urgency on this? It seems kind of artificial, right? The lights haven't existed for 100 years in this town.
They're a year past due.
yeah, there, I would say At the York meeting the other day, it was when are the lights coming on, and why aren't they coming to York, and what about those lights? Like, it was, I mean, next to water issues, it's lighting.
Well,
I was,
Bola, if I,
but
Urgency other
Other
than
than-
we've been talking about it
Yeah.
and residents have an
Right.
expectation that
Right.
it'll get done, and now we can't find contractors to bid on it. So if we break it down into smaller groups by neighborhood, we might have some of the smaller electrical contracting businesses give us a quote on it. That's the difference.
may I ask, because I'm now confused, these 20, none of these go into York.
no.
None of
That's
these go
correct.
into
No.
York.
These are the ones that
Yes.
we went
No
carefully
private
through.
subdivisions. in
Thank
here.
you,
Right.
to work with.
Oh, I didn't.
Sensitive nerve.
No, I don't.
No,
that's
I
right.
have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, none of them go into York.
Let's,
Not that it's a bad
And when we
place.
get the quotes, we will still have to take it to the board as part of a approval process.
Right.
Have we ever done anything like this before?
No, this is a new one.
the-
On these lights, you mean?
Yeah. Or no,
Yeah.
this going outside. Like we haven't
Process.
gotten RFPs, and we're trying to do something creative to get.
And no one has responded?
responded.
Have we have other things that we've bid out that no one responded? No?
Since
No?
I've been here for the
No?
last 3 years,
Okay.
I've not had
I guess
anyone
not.
not interested. You get groups where you can tell that they're busy, and maybe like for roads, we only receive 4, and in the past, we've received 6 and 8.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate that if you went back out next month, you would get more? Like if you really, you know.
I would be hopeful for one. If I get one, I'm going to be golden.
if not
Just
urgent,
because,
I'd say we just go back out
Okay, then.
with this.
yeah, because all I have
Yeah,
to
go
do
back,
is
okay,
cut and
yeah.
paste it, change the dates when they're due so that it hits in enough time to bring it to you for the July
Please.
meeting.
Yeah.
My other thing, I thought, well, I had a contingency to a contingency was, there are solar lights out there I looked at which require no wiring, no conduit, but they're and they would be equivalent in light, but I mean, I would have to bring it back to you to show you, I did get a unit price of roughly $5,000 per light, but they require no conduit, no wiring, there's no bill from Ameren. And the battery lasts about 25 years. In its 25th year, it would be like 80% capacity. So it's still shining a decent amount of light. It was just something I'm like, well, what if nobody does it again? And these people are, going to have pitchforks, where are my lights? So I was like, well, what if you did a solar? You did have to look at the panel on top, but it is a decorative light as well. But again, it was never approved when we had the whole discussion in the ward meetings and we showed them what they were getting. I don't want to do a bait and switch. It's like, well, I told you I was giving you this and now you're getting this, unless everybody
Yeah, that
has
Neighborhood
agreement.
meetings. Brandon, go ahead.
I would make a motion, let's research the solar light, not put the RFP out. I mean, that is more environmental, that's gonna be more agile. I'm super excited about that all of a sudden. So I would say let's run that down before we go back to this mill.
I'm
That's
not, I'm not opposed to the extra research for the solar, but
We can
I'm
still do
using,
the
I'm
RFP.
using the residential ones. I've used solar for 5 years and have been disappointed replacing them every single year. That this year I put in hard wiring because they just did not hold up. But if you've got something that's got a guarantee for 25 years,
That's,
I'd be happy to take a look because I agree with Brendan. It sounds like a much better way to go, but my history of using them has been poor.
Let's just go, can't we do both?
Yeah, I was going to say, can we do a parallel thing that the RFP goes back out and we get information about the solar ones and,
we could, yeah.
I think Dan's concern is
exploring it.
I think Dan's concern is that we're gonna pressure somebody to bid on this, and they agree begrudgingly to do it, and then we turn around and do solar lights
Yeah.
instead.
oh, yeah.
Right.
Well, this is just for 20 lights, though, we're just talking about right now.
Yeah, the 20, I would still do the RFP, and then we could still look at the solar and see if there's other, I only found one, but I'm sure there's other ones. It was Greenshine, I believe, was the company out in California, but
I mean, if they got a possibility without having to run conduit into these things and.
I thought those were more in tune with like York Village because, there's all kinds of other utilities in there that we don't necessarily know. It's a private road, so I don't want to really tear it up putting in conduits.
No
If you could
dig
just
rights
build the
involved.
base and put the light, it's a decorative verdigris finish and,
Sounds cool.
but again, I'd have to bring it back to you. I don't want to just make a unilateral decision and say, this is what we're doing.
Well, from my newer understanding of this, it seems like these initial 20 lights were the ones we ought to move forward with. So if
Right.
we could redo the RFP for these 20 lights and then still investigate these solar lights
Right.
for the rest of the ones that are on that list. That seems like,
138.
yeah, seems like a very reasonable.
And
Way
your
to go.
comment about making it more attractive to maybe a smaller company than these, I mean, how do you do that with an RFP? You break
I
it
can
down?
ask, this isn't an Excel table, so it'd be a matter of like separating the rows. It's like, because each light has its own bid item, so there's 20 of them, and then it adds up to a total.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you could break it up, whatever makes sense, because some of them have to be done as a group. They're on a, like, Tillis.
Connection lines.
Yeah, yeah, that was a row of lights because they're connected to a common source.
Yep.
All right. Do you think you understand what we want you to do?
Yeah, go back for the RFP so we don't, violate anything as far as purchase policy, since it's not as urgent. We'll hopefully get some results. We'll drum up some more business, see if we can get, at least 2. But then we'll also do a little more research on the solar, bring that back to you, and maybe you would consider it for the additionals.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to another money-sucking project. 10E is the culvert and road repair. We got a hole, so how are we gonna fix this, Dan?
Yeah, High School Drive, as many of you are aware, there's traffic control devices around a grate that would be like just south of Brentwood on the west side of High School. That grate has tilted down because the storm structure that used to support it has failed, as well as the top section of that box. The box culvert takes water from one side of High School to the other. I have no idea how old it is. If I were to guess, I know that area was, kind of improved in the 50s.
Yep.
So I don't know if that box is in that same time period, if it's 60 plus years old. But we did have we had a contractor that specializes in box culverts take a look at it. It looks like the vertical walls and the floor are sound, but the top has slowly corroded, either due to chlorates, I always forget which is which, but there was bar corrosion because you salt the road. So any of that moisture that gets under there could possibly corrode it. You could have off-gassing of whatever's in the water. I'm not really sure, but I know that, we have a hole. That's what I do know, and I need to do something with that hole. We can't fix it ourselves. We're not structural engineers. So what we would need to do initially is hire someone to evaluate it, come up with a report, what the problem is, what they think needs to be done. Then the next phase would actually be designing that improvement, and then the last phase would be posting that as either an RFP, or if it's an emergency, then it goes back to, do you want to do the whole RFP, which, right now it seems to be not getting any worse, but we definitely want to do this year, and we didn't budget for it because we didn't know it was going to fail. So this is another one of those where we need to scramble, do something, and find some money to do it. And I'm trying to think here, under finance, we had talked about,
To that.
oh, there is?
Does Eric want to leave the room?
Oh, yeah, stormwater.
Well, I
Yeah.
thought.
We did
instead
get a
of-
second quote for the engineering report, and it's a little bit higher than what I'd reported the other one. So I have one at 11, one like 13 something, and I'm getting a third one. I had solicited a third one, so I thought, well, if this is an emergency, do we need to submit it, through the capital process rather than, we didn't really know that this was going to fail, so we didn't really develop an RFP. We
Well,
did
right
a
now,
work scope.
you're using funds from your streets. This sounds like a stormwater issue.
Right. I mean, it is a stormwater structure. It's a box culvert. It's something that's part of a
I was
street.
gonna knock around that maybe this should be coming from parks and stormwater or stormwater reserve if there's anything left in there. It's a stormwater project. What's running through it?
I like your thinking. I'm just not 100% sure that it does meet the full legal criteria. But I think, yes, it's well worth looking into seeing if we could pull funds from there, because we keep robbing Public Works' funds and the capital improvement funds. But I would ask for Mr. O'Keefe to help.
Unfortunately, we have an opinion.
We do have an opinion. What is the opinion?
Eric, he said it is legal.
Oh, it is.
Yes.
Okay.
It's Eric is our legal opinion?
No. That is his opinion. We because Alderman Lockmiller made me aware of this, we did look at the Stormwater and Parks Fund, and we also looked at the ballot language from the passage of the stormwater sales tax, and then asked for a legal opinion. So he did say it is a legal stormwater issue, and that legally the city could use those funds to address this concern.
Who is
Then
he?
Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you.
And then we later this afternoon uploaded a memo in here, so you probably haven't had a chance to review that, where Eric identifies options for your consideration in how to fund
I-
it. So
I
where
don't-
did we put this again?
I
We
don't
haven't
have a
uploaded
memo.
it?
I uploaded, but not.
So you have to refresh to be able to populate
Oh, I see
your
it now.
board
I
docs.
didn't, yeah, I see it
All
now.
right,
So
now
if you,
you're going to
if
educate
you
me.
want
How
to
do you
take a few
refresh?
minutes to digest that.
That guy?
No, it's the second.
Yeah, do you mind, Eric?
Click the second one.
It's your budget.
This?
No, the second one.
This one?
No,
That's-
go back, that's the first one.
No, that is. the
Bola gave me the good news today.
Oh, that's the second one. That's
And
that's
so,
the second one. That's the one dated.
I looked at a couple options of what we could do.
What this said?
And the first question is, was there anything I could do
Right.
out of my current budget? And so I looked at a couple different spots. So the first thing was my operational accounts. And to be honest, those accounts are fairly maximized, and to find $40,000 is going to be tough. Doesn't mean that it would be impossible, but it'd be really tough. We're already maximizing those accounts with the centennial activities this year, so they're already a little bit above what they normally are. We also have, just regular projects going on in the parks, not capital projects, just smaller projects. So that, we'd have to make decisions of, do we either, I wouldn't say cancel centennial events, but what do we do with the events that are taking up some of the funding? And what about the other park events or park projects? The secondary consideration is that since this really is a capital project, it probably should be coming from a capital account and not an operational account, because it fits the term of capital better. So the good news is that if it is, I could get a little bit more creative. I have a lot more operational accounts, so could I take 2,000 from here, 5,000 from there, 7,000 from there, and I might be able to be a little bit more unique how I fund it. It's just not really true budgeting, and I'm not sure how the accountants would feel about that during the audit. So the second thing is looking at my capital fund for the year, and obviously I didn't have that many capital projects for the year, and so if you look, the Hanley Sports Corridor projects bid documents are almost done, and so we're about hopefully going to get that out to bid in the next couple months as we bring that back here. We've gotten quotes from the Zamboni batteries, and so we're getting ready to order those. And to be honest, those electric batteries are at the end of their useful life, and so I'd hate to kind of hold off another year on those. We do have a backup, but then again, which is the Eoli, but if we lose the backup and they don't have a backup for that, then we're basically without anything to surface the ice. We do have the water line in Hanley Park, which is 10,000. We do have quotes on that. But we're planning on starting that once we get the water line done in Northwest Park. So that is a project we're about ready to start as well. IT has replaced computers for staff already. The one big project they haven't done is the WebTrack project, which is being able to do stuff online. It also has a little bit of communication with, it can communicate a little bit better with financial software, which is important if you're going to be updating your financial software, which is what we're doing this year. So in talking to Karen, she thinks it'd be important to keep that project in this year. But if we do delay WebTrack and the water line, we could have $20,000 there. But the other thing we could do is utilize fund balance, or Fund 50 fund balance. If you look in there right now, Karen will tell you there's about $35 million in fund balance. I'm rock solid right now in fund balance. Obviously, most of that, I should say, is for Brentwood bound, obviously. But prior to the issuance of the COPS, I think there was a little bit above about $2 million in fund balance before the issuance of the COPS. I'll look at Karen, see if she'll not kill me if I say that. So I think I'm okay with that. So I assume some of that fund balance could be used without really dipping into any of the COPS money. And so the last question was that before is now void. So that's what I came up with in a really kind of hour quick examination of my budget today.
But really, all that we're looking at for today is $11,000.
Exactly, so that would be the lowest, but you could afford that within your operational budget?
Yeah, right now I could do just that piece of it, but when we get to actual nuts and bolts design construction, that's gonna jump that price tag up, which we should know that number with some certainty for the next meeting.
And I guess a question, we were putting money away into the stormwater reserve
Yes.
over the last few years. And I know that money ended up, got utilized for looking into the Brentwood Bound, call it now, back then. And then when we received that $39 million, that didn't refund that money put into the reserve?
No.
Okay. Andy?
All right. Eric, if I understand what you're talking about, you're taking it out of the Parks and Recreational funds. What's in the stormwater fund balance right now?
Well,
And where is
the
it?
issue is that the COP for Brentwood Bound is in Fund 50. So if you look at it, it is about $35 million. So I looked at it properly today at the end of the fund year. But prior to that COP going in there,
Yep.
it was a little bit above $2 million.
Okay.
So that's why I felt comfortable saying there's about $2 million of fund balance prior to the COPS going in there.
Okay.
So we do have fund balance in that fund
that could be pulled because we haven't allocated that 2 million anywhere yet.
We would never allocate it unless there was direction.
Correct.
From-
So it's
Yes.
sitting in reserves.
Yes.
And it's not at this point put into the Brentwood Bound. We've
That's-
just brought in the borrowed money and put it in there. And we're keeping that still expenditure.
Yes.
So if we're looking to pull $11,000, I can easily pull $11,000 from the stormwater straight fund, since it's a legitimate expense, to start at least getting this project cleaned up.
I think that
without
there
having
is-
to change anybody else.
Absolutely. So, and Karen and Eric, correct me, but I think that there is a strong possibility that we will see $11,000 in savings from your budget. Is that correct?
I don't know about that, Bola.
Wait a minute, you just told me I could take from 5 different places in your budget.
Well, like I said, in the
Start
capital,
off with,
in
and
the
if
capital
it
part,
changes,
if you want
then we
to
would come back.
defer either the water line or the web track, that's 10,000. That's 20,000 right there.
Okay, but that's coming out of the parks side.
No, it's still all Fund 50.
I know.
So it's still
Fund 50 is all parks and stormwater
Correct.
straight up. But of that Fund 50, 2 million
is in
is sitting in reserves because we have not spent the stormwater money. We've kept allocating it and putting it in and keeping it saved. We haven't been spending the stormwater money.
well.
We do spend the
no,
stormwater money every
Combined.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't separate that out. That's combined in Parks and Rec stormwater.
Like at the end of the year, everything just goes into the reserve.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I pictured it differently. I apologize.
Yeah.
Well, no, but I thought we used to have a stormwater,
Fund,
specifically stormwater reserve
fund.
line item.
We did, but if I can't remember exactly what we spent it for, but I think it was,
So we were
400,000 you're referring to? Yes, we set that aside for about 2 years, and then, so we had about 800,000, and then the board decided that the Brentwood Bound project, we wanted to pursue that, and we needed funds to start that project, so the decision was made to budget for that, so that's how we spent it until last year when we issued the COPS.
correct.
I too was under the impression I still had a piggy bank with something in it, and
We don't.
it doesn't.
I mean,
I will
and
make
to
the
me, rec and stormwater, that fund, it can be used for rec or stormwater.
Yes.
So that 2 million can be used for anything.
Yes,
Correct.
I will make the recommendation that we do make a budget amendment to work through the Fund 50 to start let's do the under contract to get the culvert engineered and resolved, so that we at least have a way forward to build something to fix this problem. I'd hate to have a car drive through there and have a tire drop down 3 inches because the roadway gave away. That's too late for us to act. So start from there.
Second that, so we can,
Okay. I'll second.
all right. Any other discussion? All in favor? Oh, it's a budget amendment. I guess we'll do a roll call. Why do we have to do a roll call here if we don't actually spend money?
We're forwarding it to the board, and because of such, we have to give them a positive recommendation to it.
All right.
Chairman Lockmiller,
Yes?
Alderman Leahy,
Yes,
Alderwoman Tice,
Yes.
and Alderman Wiggy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, 10F, we're talking the 2019 street sealant projects.
Okay, this one's also me. This one's a little bit easier. I saved the softball for last. If you recall, Donaldson did the sealants. I'm sure you've been on some of these streets. So we have Madge was the sealant job, this MAQS, the Modified Aggregate Quickset. They also did Sonora, and they did Kempton. So what this particular product does, it's a proprietary product, but it actually seals out the moisture, so it would go from curb to curb on the streets that we had suggested, which is actually, the ones that are listed were mill and overlays that were performed in 2014. So what we're trying to get in the habit of doing is streets that are, say, 5 years old, is to seal them and continue to seal them before they really show signs of deterioration and require you to do the full mill and overlay. Because this is about a third the cost of a mill and overlay. So the purpose of this was to seal, again, the 2014 streets. So you see Helen, Lawndale, Manderley, Park Ridge, Brentwood. And what that would do for the 73,000 is seal those streets. We'll put the markings back, stop bars, crosswalks, wherever is needed. And hopefully it'll extend that useful life, say another 7 years or so. They actually say more than that, but let's in theory agree that it's at least 5 or 7 years before we see deterioration. And then by then it might be time for that cycle to be sealed again if they're still in good shape. I know Rolla and some other cities do this so that they're not incurring these bigger costs down the line. Just for the sake of argument, we did the crack sealing on the 3 that I mentioned last year. I wanted to see what Donaldson would charge, so they gave us a price. That's $15,347. I know I can get the product and my labor is my labor, so I just went ahead and omitted that. I'll just do that myself. Buy $1,000 or so worth of material. It's in my budget. The labor's in my budget, and I won't incur that. What I would incur if I contract with them is the $83,000. We had budgeted $73,000, so you can see the delta is $9,742.75. Where I would get that money from would be the $65.30. We have $15,000 in there for trash cans. We haven't bought them. We haven't done an RFP for them. To me, it's way more important to have good streets and continue to have good streets. And if we have other savings, we could still do the full amount of trash cans, or we just do a fraction of that and budget the rest. It would be to replace the metal cans that you've seen around town, like either by the YMCA or Society of the Blind. To me, again, the streets were more important, so I'd rather sacrifice a little bit of budget from one line item to do all of this rather than get them out of cycle. And then the ones we would suggest for 2020 would be streets we had sealed 5 years prior, so those would be the 2015s, so on and so forth. So that was the recommendation, if we could get a favorable recommendation from the committee on that.
Questions for Dan? Or...
Do you even need a motion on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're using savings from other line items, is
Right.
that correct? Yes.
All right. Motion to accept your recommendation.
second.
Any other questions? So we're changing the line. We got to do a roll call.
Chairman Lockmiller,
Yes.
Alderman Leahy,
Yes,
Alderwoman Tice,
Yes.
Alderman Wiggy.
Yep.
Motion passes.
Right. I think our citizens have all left, but if any of them want to make a comment, if not, motion to
Mr.
adjourn.
Chairman, I'll make a motion that we adjourn the Public Works meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks for your hard work, everybody.
Later.